So, guys, if you didn't hear, the Joe Biden administration announced that the United States, that the United States government is pulling troops out of Afghanistan by the end of, by September 11th, 2021, this year, which would mark, 20 years to the dot. Since the attack on September 11th, right? So it's very much a weird, it's very much a strange, I think it's a weird tactic to try to line it up with the anniversary of 9/11. I think they might think that's significant. I think it just plays off as kind of strange and tone deaf. So, it's just it doesn't make sense to me. But, if you're just going to get the troops out, get them out. Don't set September 11th as the day. Seems a little gross to me. I don't know. Some people might not feel that way. That's a good thing. End the forever war. Yes. Don't be naive though. There's going to be contractors, U.S. contractors there. There's definitely going to be some type of U.S. presence, but we're just not going to have our peacekeeping troops there, right? So, again, that's good. I'm for that. But, this is also serving as more than a little bit of subterfuge for the fact that Joe Biden, his Pentagon plan is massive. His defense budget is huge, as Bernie Sanders would say. Biden's $715 billion Pentagon plan stirs debate over size, focus. So I don't care what this guy over here is saying. Who cares?
Gets through it is Democratic.
No, don't care. President Joe Biden plans to request $715 billion for his first Pentagon budget, quickly generating a vigorous debate over how much to spend on defense and how to spend it. This is in Bloomberg. Bloomberg. But it's good to know with the center how they're framing things. This budget is 1.6% higher than the $704 billion enacted for this year, which is Trump's budget, amount to a decrease of about 0.4 in real terms adjusted for inflation. The proposal announced Friday as part of the president's broader budget plan for the next fiscal year signals efforts to deter China and Russia by advancing hypersonic weapons and bolstering the U.S. Navy fleet with ballistic missile submarines and unmanned ships. Yeah, in the Washington Post story about the troop withdrawal from Afghanistan, there was made clear that the Biden administration wants to focus the American military in areas more important, like in, strategic areas, important in, positioning against Russia and China. So specifically in this, kind of revamping of the Cold War, not so cold anymore, with Russia and China. Bolstering, so in efforts to deter Russia and China by advancing hypersonic weapons and bolstering the U.S. Navy fleet with ballistic missile submarines and unmanned ships. Yay, you've had drones in the sky, now drones in the sea, right? The Pentagon's budget proposal makes up the largest share of the $753 billion the White House envisions for a national security program. That includes defense-related funding to the Department of Energy, which maintains the nation's nuclear weapons. The proposal represents an increase of about 1.7. Yeah, so over here in the nation, they're talking about it a little more clearly. Biden wants to spend even more on defense than Trump. The president's plan to hike Pentagon spending draws a rebuke from progressives by John Nichols. Listen, man, you gotta have bombs, man. Come on. Robert Reich knows a thing or two about federal budgets, and the economist who has served in 3 presidential administrations says there is something wrong with Joe Biden's plan to increase Pentagon spending above the levels proposed by former President Trump. Quote, the Pentagon already spends $740 billion every year, $2 billion every day. 1 million every minute, says the former Secretary of Labor. Jesus Christ. The last thing we need is a bigger military budget. Unfortunately, that is what the president is seeking. This has led Reich to announce that he is, quote, frankly disappointed that Biden's proposing $715 billion for the Pentagon, an increase over Trump's $704 billion defense budget, instead of moving back toward Obama-Biden era levels of defense spending or less. I guess I could have tried my Robert Reich impression there. Or less is the right direction, especially at a moment when Republican deficit hawks are circling in preparation for a tax on domestic spending that is essential for working families who have been battered by the coronavirus pandemic. Yeah, or, the infrastructure plan could be, a little better than, it's not a whole lot for 10 years when you consider everything we have to do to combat the climate crisis. Biden's $1.5 trillion budget plan has much to recommend it. The president is seeking significant increases in funding for education, proposing to invest in criminal justice, police reform, gun violence, other worthy efforts. However, despite the positive investments in these programs, says Representative Barbara Lee, California represent, I was incredibly disappointed at the significant increase in Pentagon spending to even higher levels than the Trump administration. With so many people across the country struggling to make ends meet, the last thing we need to do is increase investment in wasteful Pentagon spending. Noting that this budget adds $12 billion new dollars for weapons of war. Jeez. The longtime critic of endless war has asked us to just think how that same amount could be used to invest in jobs, healthcare, and fighting inequality, especially as we fight back a once-in-a-century public health and economic crisis. Barbara Lee. Lee was once a lonely voice on behalf of cutting Pentagon spending, but the California Democrat now has allies in powerful places. I have serious concerns, says Senate Budget Committee Chair Bernie Sanders, Independent Vermont, about the proposed $750 billion budget request for the bloated Pentagon, a $12.3 billion increase compared to the last year of the Trump administration. At a time when the U.S. already spends more on the military than the next 12 nations combined, it is time for us to take a serious look at the massive cost overruns, the waste and fraud that currently exists in the Pentagon. Yeah, man. Pramila Jayapal is blunter. We're in the midst of a crisis that has left millions of families unable to afford food, rent, and bills. But at the same time, we're dumping billions of dollars into a bloated Pentagon budget. Don't increase defense spending. Cut it and invest that money into our communities. If we were to listen, and this is the thing. This is bad, guys. This is bad. Joe Biden is... Again, he's the centrist Democrat. This is what the primary was all about. This is why the Democratic Party circled their wagons when Bernie was really pulling ahead. Because clearly, Bernie Sanders and the progressive wing of the party, whether it's Representative Jayapal, Barbara Lee, the squad, of course, they represent a real challenge to the military-industrial complex, to corporate America, to all of these institutions that hold incredible amounts of power. There's been all this discourse lately, in the online left about the squad is just kowtowing to, the establishment. I mean, I'm not I would like to see these budget hearings. I'm going to try to pay attention to them over the Pentagon budget and bring some of that to you because, Bernie Sanders is clearly saying something. Pramila Jayapal is saying something. Barbara Lee is saying something. They are actually fighting this and standing up. If we care about these things, we can look past, we can agree that it's a good thing that we're getting out of Afghanistan, but at the same time, recognize that, what's going on elsewhere here in the budget? What does this mean for, what are we trying to really do with Russia and China, right? And this is a big thing with the centrist, libs who really love, who are just on about all the Russia stuff, right? Like, oh boy, Joe Biden was tough to Putin on a call with Putin. He really gave him what for, and oh boy, we're gonna have all this money to fight Russia. Like, oh Jesus, man. So we got some comments here I want to pay attention to. J&J World, Biden's doing a performative withdrawal. I tried that with my wife, and that's how we got 2 kids. Oh, buddy, that's a good one. Mandy Sadowski, they shouldn't raise the military budget till they do a real audit. Good point. You guys remember the literal flats, like giant pallets of money that went missing in Afghanistan and Iraq. I can't remember which it was. Literally, the Pentagon lost like millions, if not billions of dollars. Just lost. Whoa, where'd it go? Where'd it go? Evil Yoda, respect our weapons. That's a call to David Feldman this morning on the Majority Report. Manny Sadowski, love Bernie. Evil Yoda, I heard today that $20 billion would end homelessness permanently. Yeah, it's priorities in the U.S. That is, of course. Thomas R. I heard that too for a while. J. Andrew World, George Washington's architect warned Washington about the military-industrial complex. Jefferson hated the guy and thought he was a flake. Funny. LaFin, absolutely. Hey, LaFin. I know who that is. 22 trillion. Jesus, 22 trillion. It was spent in Iraq and Afghanistan in the war on terror. But I'm talking about like the money that just went missing. Do you remember those stories? So I'm talking about this story specifically. How the U.S. I'm not talking about the money we obviously spent and lost spending on the war on terror. I'm literally talking about piles of cash that they just like, whoop, where'd it go? Where'd that money go? Oh, shit. Since the start of the Iraq War, the United States has sent tens of billions of dollars in assistance to Iraq, a large portion of which has been squandered or simply disappeared. Government auditors say some $61 billion was spent on reconstruction projects in Iraq from 2003 to 2012. At least 10% of the money cannot be accounted for. Some 50% of the money spent, or roughly $8 billion, was wasted. The audit also found that much of the money spent in Iraq was ineffective. Many developed projects still unfinished. Yes. We know all that. But I mean, there were literal pallets, giant piles of money that were in like military transport planes, just stacks of cash that just gone. Ooh, where'd it go? I don't know. Let's see what Joe Scarborough has to say about this Afghanistan thing, huh?
From the beginning of his administration and pushed back against generals in the Pentagon who pushed back against him.
God, we got another Sleepy Joe here. Come on, I could be more. The Joes, we're not sending our best. I hate to say it, folks. I hate to say it.
Willie, obviously, there is great risk to this move as well. We saw what happened when Americans cheered, including myself, this country's exit from Iraq. But that created a void. And into that void,
listen, grab some water.
Moved. And then we had to send troops back over to clean that up. And there is no question that the Taliban will act as the Taliban always acts, towards civilians, towards women, towards young girls, towards people who aren't Islamic extremists. They will act abhorrently. The New York Times reporting a few weeks ago that ISIS also gaining a foothold in Afghanistan as well. This certainly is something that the president and those in his cabinet understood, and a risk they were willing to take. But there is no guarantee that we won't be back or some force won't be back in the future. For the same reason we had to go back into Iraq after we left.
And that's exactly the point a lot of military leaders, former military leaders like General David Petraeus made yesterday. He was very vocal with his criticism of Joe Biden. Of course, General Petraeus commanded forces in Afghanistan for a long time and said, the endless war doesn't end just because we leave. To your point, we may have to go back and clean up what we leave behind.
Wow, MSNBC, bad idea. Is anybody surprised by this? Anybody surprised? All LaFin Absolute says read the Afghanistan papers on air. We did a show about that. Oh yeah, man. If y'all don't know, the Afghanistan papers are basically like like the Pentagon papers of the 60s about Jesus. I'm just letting y'all know how shitty I am at spelling. Afghanistan papers. They're like the Vietnam papers. Sorry, I'm struggling here because guess who's here? It's time once again for the kitty minute. Just 1 second before we get to how messed up the American military empire is. Palate cleanser with the kitten. This is Hamburger, La Hamburguesa. My baby girl. She's my daughter. This is my daughter. Look at this cat. It's the cutest cat on the planet. Nobody's got a cat. Nobody has cats cuter than mine. Nobody. Trust me. Believe me. Yeah. So, really? Surprise, surprise. The Afghanistan Papers, A Secret History of the War. At war with the truth. U.S. officials constantly said they were making progress. They were not, and they knew it. An exclusive Post investigation found. Let's see. Jandra World. They made a documentary about the missing money. It was called The A-Team. Good movie. Thomas R. Scottish Fold. Yeah, she is a Scottish Fold. I bet she would eat a big plate of haggis if I put it in front of her. She'd love it. So, guys, I mean, this is why I pay for a Washington Post subscription, so that I can share this kind of messed up stuff with you. A confidential trove of government documents obtained by the Washington Post reveals that senior U.S. officials failed to tell the truth about the war in Afghanistan throughout the 18-year campaign, making rosy pronouncements they knew to be false and hiding unmistakable evidence the war had become unwinnable. Donald Rumsfeld. You go to war with the army you have, right? The documents were generated by a federal project examining the root failures of the longest armed conflict in U.S. history. They included more than 2,000 pages of previously unpublished notes of interviews with people who played a direct role in the war, from generals and diplomats to aid workers and Afghan officials. The U.S. government tried to shield the identities of the vast majority of those interviewed for the project, and concealed nearly all of their remarks. The Post won releases of the documents under the Freedom of Information Act after a 3-year legal battle. In the interviews, more than 400 insiders offered unrestrained criticism of what went wrong in Afghanistan and how the United States became mired in nearly 2 decades of warfare. With a bluntness rarely expressed in public, the interviews lay bare pent-up complaints, frustrations, and confessions, along with second-guessing and backbiting. Quote, we were devoid of a fundamental understanding of Afghanistan. We didn't know what we were doing. Douglas Lute, a 3-star Army general who served as the White House Afghan war czar during the Bush and Obama administrations, told government interviewers in 2015. He added, what are we trying to do here? We didn't have the foggiest notion of what we were undertaking. Wow. So you can see the original comments in the document. I bumped into an even more fundamental lack of knowledge. We were devoid of a fundamental understanding of Afghanistan. What are the demographics of the country? The economic drivers? Aid? Really? We're going to do something in Afghanistan with $10 billion? Haiti is a small country in our own backyard with no extremist insurgency, and we can't even... Jeez. If the American people knew the magnitude of this dysfunction, 2,400 lives lost, Lute added, blaming the deaths of U.S. military personnel on bureaucratic breakdowns among Congress, the Pentagon, and State Department. Who will say this was in vain? Damn. Since 2001, more than 775,000 U.S. troops have deployed to Afghanistan. Some of them are my family. Many repeatedly. Of those, 2,300 died, and there were 20,589 were wounded in action, according to Defense Department figures. The interviews, through an extensive array of voices, bring into sharp relief the core failings of the war that persist to this day. They underscore how 3 presidents, George W. Bush, Barack Obama, and Donald Trump, and their military commanders have been unable to deliver on their promises to prevail in Afghanistan. No, of course not, because that was never part of the project. I mean, it was called we call it the Endless War for a reason. Why? How could you wage a global war on terror? Terrorism is a tactic. It's like, right? I mean, it's like you can't point to one place and be like, that's where terrorism is and comes from. Terrorism is a constant national security threat, right? This was a way to massively bloat our defense budget for sure, but also the amount of power that the federal government has in surveillance, in the militarization of not just international, like our international footprint, but domestically. Like part of why, like the Snowden leaks are just a huge indictment of the Patriot Act and the Department of Homeland Security. It's just insane. And then when you had things like this happen, U.S. drone strike kills 30 pine nut farm workers. Ugh, stupid ads. Guys, the ads are everywhere. I apologize. Why? Look, you click the ad, then leave it. It goes away. All right. U.S. drone strike kills 30 pine nut farm workers in Afghanistan. This was under Trump. This was in September of 2019. A U.S. drone strike intended to hit an Islamic State hideout in Afghanistan killed at least 30 civilians resting after a day's labor in the fields, officials said on Thursday. The attack on Wednesday night also injured 40 people after accidentally targeting farmers and laborers who had just finished collecting pine nuts at mountainous Wazir Tanji in eastern Nangarhar province. 3 Afghan officials told Reuters. Geez, look. Graphic on civilian cat. The graphic doesn't work. What happened to your graphic? Oh. You don't have a graphic on the civilian cat. It's goofed up. Yeah, we don't need to fix that. U.S. forces conducted a drone strike against Daesh terrorists in Nangarhar, said Nangarhar Colonel Sonny Leggett, a spokesman for U.S. forces. We were aware of the allegations of the death of non-combatants and are working with local officials. We are aware of the allegations of the death of non-combatants. Guys, I can't even. I can't anymore. Manny Sadowski, what the fuck? Janger World, I assume the people who planned the invasion watched Rambo 3 and Living Daylights and made a plan to invade Afghanistan. Manny Sadowski missed the cats. I can bring another cat in here. Where'd they go? Guys, this stuff is super dark, and this is why, I mean, part of the long game left project of building power and hopefully taking more power in Congress for the progressive and left, the actual left, whether they're democratic socialists or just progressives or whatever, an actual left that stands against the military-industrial complex. This is the project. This is our long game, long-term project, okay? And like a big thing that attracts people to the left is the anti-war movement. That's how I first connected and became a person on the left. Was in my youth protesting the war in Iraq and Afghanistan, of course. And I believe if people are more clear about that, where you don't have this kind of Biden is pulling us out of Afghanistan, but what is he saying? Like, because we got to be ready for China and Russia, right? Then that's just this is something that it's not like it's hard for me to give him credit. I really don't like the guy. But Donald Trump did speak out against the war in Iraq during the primary. I remember watching the Republican primary, and there were people in the comments going, what is this, the Republican primary or a Michael Moore movie? Like, are all these Republicans pissed off that he was talking crap about George Bush and the war in Iraq? But that, there are a lot of low information voters. There are a lot of people who, very, very pay little attention, and they hear a couple things like that, and it might sway their vote. There are lots of anti-war voters who they might not vote on much anything else, but they hear that and they'll go, yeah, I'll vote for that person, right? So, the militarism and the empire, building and all of this stuff is not that popular among a lot of the electorate. It's popular among some very serious people, right? But, as far as like just kind of this general idea, especially like working class people, they don't like the idea of us being in endless wars, feeding this militaristic war machine poor people who enlist, right? I mean, it's so basically morally repellent to most people, right? That I think if this is something people could run on, right? Even I know, if you're running for a House district, foreign policy isn't the number one thing, but if you just voice that a few times and say, hey, yeah, we need to get out of these forever war, we need to get out of Iraq, and take defense budget spending and put it into domestic spending, then I think you can get votes that way.